Head off. We're happy to start the event. Yeah, that's great. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for coming along. And thanks also for, I suppose, AHED for reaching out to us. And so this workshop is facilitated by AHED, which will explore 2 AHED programs as tools for supporting students with disability as they prepare to enter the graduate world of work. So Get AHED provides upskilling workshops for students with disabilities to get them job ready, and WAM is our graduate internship program. So I'm delighted now to hand you over to Hannah and to Caroline. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Angela. And yeah, so it's a nice short session, I think, and I think me and Caroline are particularly excited today because we haven't got to present together, I think, in years. I think probably pre-COVID, it's the last time we've presented together. So thanks everybody for giving up your lunchtime to come along. We won't keep you too long, and I suppose we're going to be outlining those 2 programs there that Angela mentioned there. And first, I suppose we're going to just set the scene a little bit in terms of you know, what disclosure is, how that conversation might look different in the workplace, and then a little bit from our learnings and research that we've done as well. So I should start by saying my name is Hannah. I'm the Student and Graduate Engagement Officer in AHED, and then Caroline, I think everyone knows Caroline. Caroline is our Employment Manager, and she'll come in a little bit later in the presentation. So Caroline, if you want to move on. So we'll start, I suppose, with a question I always like to start is what is disclosure? And in its simplest form, you know, the definition is just informing someone about a disability or specific learning difficulty or mental health difficulty that a student or a graduate might have. But in actual fact, disclosure is a little bit more complicated than that. So if we can move on there, Caroline. It's more than just a label. It's more than someone just giving you what their diagnosis is. You know, it really is about understanding, whether that's in an education setting or in a work context, how a person carries out tasks, so how they're going to get something done, knowing what accommodations work best for them, and being able to implement those. You know, again, whether that's in a work setting, knowing what kind of software maybe that works best, and maybe that's during education while they're in college, exploring that and knowing themselves what's going to work best for them. And then finally, a lot of it is about positive attitude and I suppose our own internal monologue about what disability is and how that looks, and generally around diversity as well. So that's really what disclosure is in essence in a conversation. And it's a very different conversation, and there's very different things to think about when we look at education versus employment. And that's something that we really want to be preparing students with disabilities for when they get to the stage where they're going to graduate and move on to their careers. You know, in an educational setting, students are encouraged to disclose. There's a very obvious place for them to go to disclose, and then as well there's access to a fund that's specifically there to enable the supports to happen, the fund for students with disabilities. But in an educational or in an employment context, it's a little bit different. So you know, there's not necessarily a person that they should go to talk about disclosure. There often isn't chances for them to disclose that would come up. So some of the quotes here that we have in this slide are from our worries wall from, I think, 2018, maybe. I'm trying to think back of 19. Yeah, 2019 when we had our last in-person Building the Future, which is an event I'll talk about in a little while, where we asked the graduates that attended what were they worried about in regards to work and in regards to having a disability and working. And so these things were coming up. They were worried that people wouldn't hire them because they have a disability, worried that employers want to arrange support, but how will they be funded? Where is that money going to come from? And you know, things like gaps in the CV. Maybe they didn't have the chance to work part-time like their non-disabled counterparts would have been able to do because they're having to manage, you know, their disability, and there's, you know, that added bit of work that comes into that. They wanted to know, would employers look past their disability? Would they be able to see the value in their work and their skills and what they can bring to the team? Or will they be focused on, you know, I need X, Y, or Z support? And then as well, unfortunately, a lot of graduates are worried about were ended up in a hostile work environment where you know, their supports aren't met, or there's a negative view of disability, which is something that we do a lot of work on to try and make workplaces not like that, but it's something that they are concerned about. And if we can move on there. So we gather feedback, or I would gather feedback, I suppose, anecdotally from our disclosure workshops that we do in different colleges and universities around the country. And really the kind of concerns that were coming up, or the feedback that I got from students in those disclosure workshops, can very easily be broken down into 3 different main areas. The first one is fear. So they were not wondering if they were going to be discriminated against. They weren't worried about, you know, what that might look like. They were expecting it to happen, and they have already faced discrimination. A lot of these students have already. So whether that be getting part-time work, or you know, maybe if they've gone on placement or something, they're already expecting there to be an issue with disability. So the question really is, what do I do when an employer won't give me a reasonable accommodation, rather than how do I have a conversation about asking for reasonable accommodation? They're already anticipating that there's going to be an issue. So there's a huge fear around disclosure, which would prevent them from disclosing in the first place if they can help it. And then the second thing then, which we try and address in our disclosure workshops, is a confusion around when they should disclose. So at what stage do they legally have to disclose is a question that would come up a lot. So they're not sure what the right time is, and they're not sure what they're entitled to in regards to you know, what their rights are as a person with a disability in employment. And so this is something that we would discuss at the workshop, and try and, I suppose, make sure that students know what their rights are, in terms of that there is no time that they legally have to disclose their disability, and it's a personal decision. And we kind of talk through, I suppose, what the benefits or the drawbacks, and what things need to be considered when deciding when is the right time. And the next one is something that I think is great to kind of chat to you all about today, which is around unsure of supports, that a lot of students are just not really sure what supports they can ask for, or know where to begin in order to, you know, figure that out. So I always recommend that this is a great thing that students should be thinking about while they're still in college. It's a brilliant opportunity that they have while they're still in college to actually be exploring you know, different types of supports, trying out different, maybe assistive technologies, trying out different ways of working, maybe, you know, what way did they take notes, or that kind of thing. It's a brilliant opportunity for them to be doing that now, so that by the time that they get to a workplace, they know exactly what they're asking for. That's going to make the conversation a lot easier for them if they actually know what they want from that conversation. Because, you know, how are they supposed to disclose if they don't know what they need? And so it's kind of an open-ended conversation. So that's something that I think is really important, and I would really encourage people to, in this space, to encourage students to do, is to try and figure out those supports. So Caroline, I think then you're going to talk a little bit about the WAM research.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll put just in the context of WAM, and I'll explain a little bit about that later on. But we recently released a publication. Well, I say recently, it was actually summer 2020, and we did a survey with some of our graduates who had taken up an internship with one of the employers we work with, or the employers we worked with, and we kind of, you know, that lots of different questions in that survey, but one of the things was, you know, were you more confident in disclosing your disability after going through our program, because we offer a needs assessment and all that kind of way, and it's a safe space. So 66% of our graduates said that yes, they were more confident in disclosing their disability, but 11% were still unsure, and about 23% said no, they weren't more confident. And some of the reasons for not disclosure was, I suppose it depends on the employer. So they were kind of like figuring out which employers were, I suppose, more disability friendly. And the second quote there, before this placement, I was not confident I could work in the mainstream, and I no longer worry about my confidence in working in the mainstream, but disclosure is still a difficult topic for me to broach. And then someone said, prefer not to dwell on my disability, and I only disclose where I need to or where necessary. And I think this is important, you know, like, 97% of our graduates while on placement fully disclose to their manager, but when they leave that placement, yes, 66% are more confident, but there's still that 1/3 of our graduates who still are not sure or go, no, I won't do that. And it very much stems back to what Hannah was saying around that fear of being discriminated against and etc. I suppose when we're talking about recruitment and that transition to employment, you know, I suppose you guys as career services will know this, but you know, employers do have a legal obligation to reasonably accommodate at all stages of recruitment. It's clearly there in the Employment Equality Act. You know, they have to provide reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. But the problem is in order to provide that reasonable accommodation, people need to disclose. So if there's this bit of a catch-22 situation, if people and students and graduates aren't wanting to disclose, but they could need a reasonable accommodation to get them through the recruitment process, they might be screened out right at that stage. And I suppose many employers are, what we have found, you know, through our work in WAM, they're often unsure or unaware of what is a reasonable accommodation and what support could we do instead of, you know, this particular process, or don't have alternative solutions. In some, well, for actually, to be honest, most employers don't even ask the question at the application stage, do you require any reasonable accommodation? You know, they have an equality statement, you know, we are an equal opportunities employer, but for the most part, employers don't actually specify, you know, oh, contact this person if you require reasonable accommodation. So I just kind of wanted to highlight just this modern day recruitment. When I started in AHECS 10 years ago, like it very much, you know, was just a standard face-to-face interview. You might have had a second interview. And I'm sure you have all noticed now there's so many layers now before you even get to an interview stage. So first thing you have is your application form. So I kind of put in some of the barriers or some of the difficulties that it could create. So with these online application portals that are embedded onto a website of a company, you know, sometimes they're not actually accessible to people who do use assistive technology, that they're not, you know, linking up with their screen reading software. They might not provide any spell checking, you know, it might not come up there. So for someone with dyslexia, they may struggle, you know, with their application because their software is not speaking with this online application portal. And secondly, video applications are really becoming very popular now, particularly with the big multinationals and the big graduate programs. And I remember looking up one employer, and you know, the first step was submit a video, a 5-minute video of yourself, and you know, they gave you kind of areas where you should be talking about. But I'm actually deaf, right? And yes, I'm speaking to you guys right now, but I was kind of thinking, but what if my friends who don't speak and use Irish Sign Language, like how would they be able to apply for this particular graduate program? You know, will they send their video in sign language? But there's no interpreter that's going to be able to interpret that. But also people who might have a speech impediment, people who are visually impaired, you know, that you're ineffectively disclosing straight away on camera, you know, because you might not make that eye contact. It might be very visible. People who have autism as well. So sometimes video applications aren't the best route for people with disabilities. Now some get on great, but it does present a barrier for certain disabilities for sure. And then we look at psychometric testing. This is a big thing we're seeing in my work with WAM employers. We very much advocate that psychometric testing is waived for any of our jobs that we have on offer. And it's really because the employers are using psychometric tests as literally a way to whittle down numbers. You know, they get 2,000 applications on a grad program and they're going to go, right, let's do psychometric tests and let's get the top 50%. But often testing providers don't actually provide alternative tests for people with disabilities. So stuff like verbal reasoning can affect people who have autism. They're going to struggle through that particular element of the test. You know, extra time sometimes isn't provided for those who do actually request reasonable accommodation, or they could be inaccessible to, again, people using screen reading software. So we do a lot of work with employers on our program to figure out what exactly are you using this psychometric test for. Are you using it to screen out? Because we don't recommend that. But some employers we work with actually use it to maybe look at areas. So they've gone through certain stages and then they do the psychometric test or the assessment to actually identify gaps where they could further develop in. So that kind of psychometric test we do advocate, but to screen out, we're very much, in favour of waiving that psychometric test or providing an alternative recruitment process instead of that. And then you have technical tests. So this is where often, if they're brought into a room and, they're given 30 minutes and they're handed a piece of A4 paper with a kind of instructions on it, often these are inaccessible. They could be in font size 10, they're hard copy format, and time tests as well. So if you've 30 minutes to do it and you've got to write down your answer, that could be difficult for people who struggle with writing or processing or reading. So again, employers are not really thinking about, every element of the recruitment process and asking what supports they need at every stage. And then lastly, group assessment. Sometimes this doesn't actually allow the best self to come through, because just with group assessments, you have people observing kind of teamwork and who's taking the lead and who's being quite confident and enthusiastic in all this kind of way. But if you have a disability, so for example, if you are deaf like myself, even though I can hear, I struggle in group situations and I will actually revert into myself because I've missed out on what people have said. And I'm not going to be the best Caroline I'll be in a group assessment. So if I was going forward for an interview and they said, oh, part of it is a group assessment, I'm confident enough now, after 10 years of working, that I will ask that's not actually accessible for me. I require an individual assessment. But people who are coming out of college, they don't know what to ask for. They don't know if they can ask for that. And employers aren't sure if they can provide that either. So it's really important for career services to be very mindful. I know you do a lot of work with employers on this as well, to really think about what alternatives could be presented to people with disabilities if they do disclose. So Hannah, back to you.
Thanks, William. So we've offered maybe a few problems or a few issues that we're seeing coming up, and now I suppose we want to talk through some of the things that we have to offer you and what we'd love to collaborate and have your help on as well. So firstly, we're very proud to show our lovely new look of our database. So our OneWorks database basically is a student and graduate database that is all of our work, I suppose, that we do directly with students and graduates comes through there. It's a hub of job alerts and events that are all free for job seekers, students and graduates with disabilities to avail of, and from a level 6 or higher degree, or indeed if they're still studying. And really that is the key thing. We want students who are as early as we can to be on that database, so that they are, like, we know all of these issues that we've just discussed there previously. We know what they are. We're able to anticipate what the students need from us, and we want to be able to provide that and have students familiar with these kind of skills, I suppose, that we need them to have, and information that we need to have. So really we want your help with this as much as you can. It's something that we're struggling with at the minute. Actually, we've done a complete rebrand, I suppose, of the database, and we did a cull of users, I suppose, that were non-active anymore, which meant that our numbers on the database are a little bit lower, and we're trying to build that back up. We think we have some great things to offer. We have some great events, which we'll speak about in the next couple of slides, and we want students to be able to avail of those, and indeed we have brilliant jobs, which Caroline will talk about in a while, that are paid at graduate level, that again we want students and graduates to be able to avail of. Yeah, sorry, Caroline.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in here. So I think we probably forgot to include a slide on the numbers of students with disabilities currently studying in higher education. So we are about to release our current report, which represents the academic term 2020-21. But it's just quoting from the last report, 6.2% of the student population have a disability in college right now. We're back in 2019-2020, and that number has been increasing year on year. It looking likely to be 6.3% in this latest report that's going to be released very, very soon. But that's not including all of the colleges who responded to the survey. So we think it's probably around the 10 to 12% mark, because you have students who aren't disclosing and who are not registered with the disability support services, so they're not captured in this report. So, you know, if you think about it, over 10% of the population have a disability, and that equates to maybe in the 6.2, it equates to just under 16,000. So, you know, there could be potentially 20,000 students who have a disability, and we want all of those 20,000 students on our database. Unfortunately, it's not. We're in the low hundreds. And because, as Hannah mentioned, we did that big redevelopment and we culled a lot of users to keep it up to date. So we really would love your support in promoting our database and our program, because you'll see we offer many great things. So yeah, Hannah, I'll shut up now. Sorry.
No, I think that's exactly it. There's so many students, and I think actually just to mention that, I think it's a great point, Caroline, to bring up that if you are meeting students and they're not necessarily registered with a disability office, like we don't care if they have a formal diagnosis, if they have registered for supports previously, if they have a disability and they identify that way, if they need supports and you think they'd benefit from the work that we do, we would love to have them on the database. So yeah, I'm sure you've actually all been being tagged and stuff in our comm strategy in the last couple of months. I would imagine you've seen it, but we'll continue to do that, and we're happy to kind of work with you in whatever way works in order to get that information out to students as well. So in terms of what those events are that students can tap into once they're registered on the database, so from a Get Ahead standpoint, and the program that I look after, the Think Twice workshops happen throughout the year, and they're exclusively for people who are on our database. And if we say so ourselves, they're actually quite good and useful workshops, and they're reactionary. So, you know, we come up with the topics based on the issues that we're seeing coming up, and we're always kind of developing those and making sure they're up to date and relevant for the students and the graduates. So some of those are resilience. So our resilience workshop was only yesterday actually, and it was a really great workshop in order to build that competency in graduates. As we know, that's something that graduates, not only students who have disabilities, but all graduates can learn from. Then things as well like CV writing, interview preparation, disclosure is a big one, and we do that in lots of different ways as well. And then assistive technology, because that piece that I spoke about at the start, where a lot of students aren't aware of supports that are available to them. So we speak about that, about what kind of things are common in the workplace and how you would ask for them and how they look. And then we also, on top of that, so they would all be run by ourselves internally. And we also then do some boot camps with our employers that we work with through WAM. And these are really great opportunities for students to meet and network with employers, and to kind of ask questions directly to them about what they need to be preparing and what they need to know to kind of get that edge in when they're going for positions. So some of the events that we would do with employers in those bootcamp form are mock assessment days, getting ready to start work, so preparation for starting work, and then growing or building a LinkedIn profile. And those are usually a little bit longer forms. So the Think Twice workshops are usually about an hour. The Get Ahead boot camps are usually, like a 3 hours, like kind of a morning, and they would include usually a one-to-one element where students or graduates on the database are actually getting an opportunity to have some coaching on whatever the topic is as well. So those are all throughout the year. And then as well, we have disclosure sessions specifically then with DSS offices, so disability support offices, and we're available all throughout the year to manage those. So I suppose if anybody is interested, if there's any institutions that think they could benefit from one of these for their students, I'd be more than happy to facilitate. So you can just give me an email. My contact will be at the end. So basically at these sessions, again, they're about an hour long, and I would come in they've all been online, but they used to be in person, and you'd go and we talk about, supports at work, again, what kind of supports are common, what a reasonable accommodation is and how that might look and work. We talk about the equality legislation, so again making sure that students are aware of what their rights are and what they have to consider when thinking about disclosure. And then again, that positive attitude piece is something that's really important. So we do talk about confidence, about talking to an employer about your disability, and I suppose how to phrase that, how to build students' confidence so that when they are having those conversations, they feel confident enough to do that. And then one of our other events that we have, which this year is very exciting. It's going to be after being online for 2 years. It's a hybrid model we're looking at this year. So Building the Future is our careers event for students and graduates with disabilities or specific learning difficulties. It's like any other, I suppose, careers event, except there's a specific focus on accessibility, and it's tailored for students and graduates who have disabilities. So a date for your diary is the 31st of August, so that's when the next one will be. And as I said, it's a hybrid model this year, which we're well, excited and nervous about, I think. So very, very excited to get working on that. So the in-person elements, we have mock interviews, CV clinics, and those will be online as well, and they work brilliantly, and they're really good opportunities again for students to kind of be checking these things before they actually go to an interview or before they're applying for a job, that they have an up-to-date CV. And then I'm absolutely buzzing to have the headshot station back as well, because that was such a popular element with the attendees the last couple of years before COVID, where students can basically, or graduates can, for free, can get an up-to-date headshot taken by a professional photographer. And we still see some of the grads from a couple of years ago using their pictures that they got at Building the Future, so that's great to see. We also will have an employer exhibition space, and this year that'll be a little bit more casual, where students can, I keep saying students, where attendees can register or can, network with employers again, ask questions about accessibility, ask questions about, what it's like to work in that company. And then on top of that, we have workshops and panel discussions as well, where attendees can hear from the employers. And then, as I said, a lot of these elements then are going to be online as well. So separately, there'll be virtual mock interviews and CV clinics. And we're exploring now with City, who is hosting it, how that might be streamed, the workshops as well. So really exciting stuff, and we're very excited to work on that event. So I think, Caroline, you're going to talk through WAM.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So Hannah kind of looks after the kind of upskilling with students and graduates, getting them ready for the workplace. And I suppose the other program that we have in AHED is called our WAM program. So it stands for Willing Able Mentoring. It's been around since 2005, and we've placed over 550 graduates in all of these lovely employers you'll see on the screen there. And those are employers that have worked with us in the last 2 years alone. So you can see we have so many great multinationals. We work with the public sector as well, and we have locations all over Ireland. So it's not just a Dublin focus. But what it essentially means is that employers are partnering with us to provide paid graduate level jobs exclusively for people on our database. Okay, so they're not competing with anybody else outside of the people that we send them. So for example, there's a job that we have, and there could be 20 applicants. So those 20 people are competing against each other, and they all have a disability of some sort. They're not getting lost in this mix of thousands of people. There is safe space to disclose as well, because we do ask the question, and we do work with employers on looking at their recruitment processes, as I outlined earlier on. We ask employers to be very clear, tell me what it is so we understand it, so we know what question to be asking our graduates when they apply. We provide support and training to the employers at every stage of the process. And when an employer partners with us, it's not something that happens overnight. I myself and my team, we meet several times. We discuss with their, head of HR. We discuss with the head of the division. Sometimes it has to go to America for approval. So it's a very long process for an employer to come on board. And they've often attended a lot of our training events as well. And we're there really to support the employer, but we're also supporting the graduates as well. So what support we offer to the graduates, but also for the employer, is our needs assessment model. So many students with disabilities would have got an educational needs assessment, sometimes called a learning lens report, in college or university. We do a similar one, but looking at the workplace and the impact of their disability versus the job that they're about to do. We then make a report that goes to the employer, and we work with the employer to ensure all the recommendations can be implemented. All of our graduates receive a mentor. So this is someone from the company who's gone through our training, and it's a step mentoring program outside of their, if they're on a grad program, they have a buddy or whatever. This is separate. This is a WAM mentoring model. And then we also have an e-learning course for our graduates. So it covers a lot of things around, getting ready for work, your first day, what you should think about at the end of your contract, etc. And one thing we actually started doing as a result of the pandemic 2 years ago, with the move to remote working, we really recognised the isolation that some of our grads may feel. So we started doing ourselves to check in with our graduates, to let them have an opportunity to network with each other, even though they were all working in various different employers. And that's been really, really successful. And we're actually going to continue that regardless of whether everyone stops remote working or not, because what we're finding now is it's almost like a peer support group. So you have some of our grads who've been working for 3 months, and then you have this other grad about to start work, and they're sharing tips and advice on what to do. And it's an opportunity for them to discuss any issues they're having with their disability in the workplace. It's very much a safe space. And then obviously any graduate or employer at any stage can contact us throughout if there's any issues on placement, or if there's any issues with getting supports or whatnot. So I suppose just in the last 2 years, I just wanted to kind of highlight, we've been extremely busy. We've been very lucky, I think, even with COVID. It did impact us initially, but last year was actually our busiest year to date. So I suppose over the last 2 years combined, we've actually advertised over 150 positions with 18 major employers. And I suppose one of those employers is the public service, civil service, and that includes alone 20 departments. So it's definitely more, but we've advertised 150 jobs, like paid jobs for graduates with disabilities. Over 400 interviews were facilitated, all on virtual formats, and over 85 people were offered positions. So some really, really good work that was happening in the last 2 years. But I suppose, how does it work for graduates? And this would be important for you to know. They must have a disability. So as Hannah mentioned, we don't look for evidence of disability. We don't look for a formal diagnosis. We trust that if they are disclosing and if they're registering on our database that they do have a disability. We're not kind of looking for any medical verification or anything like that. And they do have to meet the minimum educational requirements outlined on job spec. So some companies require a minimum level 8, some companies go actually level 6 is fine, and some say level 7 and they need it in biomedical engineering. So they must meet the minimum educational requirements. So those are 2 requirements, but the one that's really important as well is they do have to be work ready and they have to be available for full-time work. So all of our positions are full-time. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to facilitate part-time work. And we do know that that is a barrier for some people with disabilities, but due to our funding constraints, it is always full-time positions that we advertise. So they either submit a CV or an application form. We're very much trying to replicate what happens in the mainstream process. So any jobs that we've agreed and we have with employers, they're advertised on our website, they register in a database, they see the job pop up, and then they upload either an application form or a CV, depending what the employer was looking for. They then kind of declare any reasonable accommodations they wish to have at any stage of the recruitment process. We send that over to the employer. The employer is the one who shortlists and conducts interviews. We provide pre-interview training to the employer around disability. We also kind of discuss with them around being mindful of gaps in CVs and all that kind of way. They would have been working with us for a year up to this point, so they would have very good awareness when they're shortlisting as well. If they are successful, if someone is successful, what happens is we do all the training and we do the needs assessment as well, and then they start work. So it can take about 2 months from time of application before someone actually starts. And sometimes, depending on employers, you know, if it's a grad program, it might be September start date. But that's essentially how it works. It's very much replicating the mainstream recruitment process. We don't job coach. We don't do one-to-one. We don't make a recommendation. It's a very competitive process because they're competing with really highly qualified graduates. Most of our graduates have master's level, you know, so we really want to kind of grow our database and get more students so that they're applying for these opportunities, because a lot of our opportunities would be aimed at final year students as well. So these are just kind of some of the positions we've had in the last 6 weeks alone. So the first kind of 4 there, we've advertised 2 positions with Bank of Ireland graduate programme. So what Bank of Ireland did, they ring-fenced 2 of their grad intake specifically for people who came from our database. So Pfizer, they're a new employer last year. We've had various roles in engineering and pharma, so very much biomedical. And they've offered a range of positions. So they could be 6-month contracts, 11-month contracts, and we've actually had permanent contracts as well. And we've been working with Newbridge and with Dublin on those. Bank of Ireland ones was a 2-year grad programme. Optum Ireland, they're a new employer this year. They're based in Donegal. So we advertise a technology development programme. And the civil service, again, as I mentioned, we work with public sector, and they were at executive officer grade, and they were across all of Ireland in a variety of different roles, legal, policy, IT, the whole lot. So what we have upcoming, I suppose next week we're going to be going live with Allianz. We have 8 positions with Allianz. I think 7 of them are for 12-month contract. I think 1 of them could be a permanent contract. So they're predominantly business and marketing roles. So we'd love your help to promote that. We will also have ESB, they're a regular employer of ours for the last 10 years. And they're typically business, engineering and marketing roles, and they typically are for 6-month contract with a view to extend into 9 months. And they're, again, mostly Dublin, but we do have Cork and Waterford sometimes. And then one thing we're piloting this year is our actually working with local authorities. So we've been, again, discussing with the local government management agency for the last 2 years. I've been having several meetings with them. So we've gotten the go ahead to actually recruit with local authorities. So we actually are delighted to have 10 positions with 6 local authorities. And they're Kerry, Donegal, Waterford, Kildare, Limerick, and I can't remember the other one. Cavan and Longford, actually. I said 7 local authorities. So we're really excited about that. That's going live at the end of June, and that's at a grade 4 admin role. So the starting salary is 32,000 per annum. So some really, really exciting roles. And even last year we had roles with Facebook, Pharma, the Green Party. It was such a variety of different roles and different backgrounds. So we do, and they're all paid jobs. Like, they're brilliant, brilliant jobs. So we really want to get the word out as much as we can. So I think that's it from me and Hannah. Unless, Hannah, you have anything else you want to add? No?
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. No, I think that's everything. That's our contact details there as well. As I said, if anybody wants to get in contact about either a workshop or needs more information on any of that, both myself and Caroline are happy to talk directly to anybody.
That's great. Thanks a million. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but one thing I was just wondering, is there a possibility of doing maybe some short videos that we could share on Instagram? That we found that has been quite useful. So even if you could kind of maybe start a topic, and then if they want more detail, they can contact you, or you can put in a link for more details. That might be good to share as well, if that helped.
Yeah, we definitely can. I think this is actually something similar, Angela, that our communication officer, Jess, has been working on. And I know if I'm to flag our Instagram page, Jess will always be very happy with me, because that's something that she's worked on. So it's a great tool. So actually, I think that's a great idea and something we could definitely work on. I think someone has asked then for the flyer for the WAM database, so I can definitely circulate that again. We have a kind of communications pack for that as well, so I'm happy to share that maybe with yourself, Angela, and it can be circulated as well.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, do.
Oh yeah, and Caroline, thanks for putting that in, and yeah, Dawn. Yeah, so look, I don't know, there's some nice comments coming in thanking you as well there. So again, do you have the whole database, Caroline and Hannah? Do you have the AHECS database? Do you have our contact details? Do you have every service details?
So what do you mean, Angela?
All the different colleges, do you have all the contact details for us?
So this is something that we have been struggling a little bit with, because staff members do change, and sometimes you see, this is, I'll be very open and honest here now. Sometimes when we send stuff to career officers, when they see disability, they forward it to the disability support service, and it's like, no, this is careers for students with disabilities. So sometimes that can get lost, I think, a little bit,
Yes.
you know, and that's why me and Hannah were delighted to come here today, because, you know, we really do want students and graduates to be aware of our services. I mean, we have so many good jobs, like you've seen, like that wasn't even half of like what we have, and they're paid, and the minimum, like I just did our annual report there, the average salary is coming in at about 32,000. You know, they're really good graduate level jobs. And even kind of last week we advertised a job with SCORE, so they're a new employer, and it was for a financial accountant. So what they were looking for was someone with I suppose kind of an accountancy qualification, and that was all they needed, with a view to getting their, you know, I suppose accountancy qualification. Unfortunately we only had 4 applications, and it was like, you know, and it was, I know it's a struggle in general, but
Yes.
I think it's just getting the message out there, because these are exclusively for people with disabilities, and it's not just those fresh out of college, but, you know, we do work with, I suppose, older graduates who perhaps have acquired a disability and have been out of work for the last kind of 5 to 10 years, you know. So that's why we're really happy to, Hannah, to do work individually with colleges and do workshops, and we'll get a Hannah to send you the pack that we have, and, you know, social media, tag us. And I know Jess has been tagging kind of a lot of the colleges already, particularly if it's in a certain location. I think with the Donegal Optum job, she was tagging all Sligo and Galway and Donegal to try and Letterkenny, try and get the numbers up there, you know.
And just Gavin has put in there, or the admin at ahecs.ie, that email address into chat. So if you have any information, if you send it there, Caroline is excellent for sending it out to all the members as well. Yeah.
That'd be great. But yeah, we're happy to do these kind of talks, you know, maybe every couple of years, because I know most of you have been there a long time, but, you know, staff do change and may not be aware of our services. So very happy to collaborate on anything.
I know